Konnichiwa, students from Todai, Murayama Sensei, Yamagata Sensei, and Yoshida-san. And this is my pleasure to be invited to give a lecture for this urban design workshop at Department of Urban Engineering, University of Tokyo. So I'd like to share with you some of my thought about urban design as the beginning for this intensive workshop. I just watched the video of the midterm presentation from students. It was very impressive. So with that understanding, I would like to share with you how we conduct urban design, particularly in the studio process. And I would probably address some issue of Shinagawa studio at the end. So let me start with defining urban design. And I would like to talk about objective urban design and different model, different mode of urban design, and 6 possibilities that we can redefine urban design, and to talk about theory of urban design. And I would like to conclude with some remark, how we move from traditional urban design approach to urban system design method that we have. So this is a book that Yamagata-san and I, we co-edited and co-authored with, of course, with Murayama Sensei and Yoshida-san in this book. And we talk about urban system design in the context of IoT, Internet of Things. So that will be part of the lecture at the end. So my name is Perry Yang, again, from Georgia Institute of Technology. I'm kind of have a joint appointment to both planning and architecture. And I'm also running a design practice called ESD, Ecosystem Design Studio, both in Atlanta, Shanghai, and Taipei. So let's begin with defining urban design. Urban design deals with physical form, urban physical structure of city. So that you can see in Manhattan, for example, we have this Manhattan Island. When you zoom in, you see the street block structure. And when you zoom in further, you see 3-dimensional urban environment. And there's a societal pattern and flow behind urban form. So that's our subject matter. And we'd like to ask a fundamental question. Can a city be designed given the scale and complexity of a city? And so we may make an argument that city to a certain degree is designable due to its city as a intended landscape. It is shaped by human over time. It may not be designed by limited singular hand or limited people. They are collectively formed and produce it over time in the history. So we like to see city as a created object, and urban planner and designer play a critical role in that process. So this is one example that I did at Watertown urban design in Kaohsiung. And you can see there's a future image of the waterfront to reutilize the industrial port, that area. And we have kind of future image, infrastructure intervention like light rail system running through the waterfront. And behind that, you can see the images representing the city was a very highly polluted industrial city. So we have some idea for transforming that industrial city and moving to the future. So urban design is about future. It's about projecting the possible future space in society. I think that is, so we like to go beyond what it is. And so you can see a lot of analysis that you have done for Shinagawa are based on existing data, but what will be the future changes of the place will be critical for urban design. And urban design is also empowered by creative thinking. It is analytical because we need to deal with urban issue based on data, based on very complicated stakeholder interaction. But there's a design dimension, which means that there's a creative process that for imagining what the future would be. So you can see this is one of a metro station area in the city of Taipei. So there's a subterranean public space and plaza being proposed by urban designer, and they will be connecting, different program, different land use, different function of the city, and there's a placemaking agenda behind. It's the shaping of a public space to allow people to come here. It's an interchange. It's one of the important urban node of the city. So you need some kind of creative thinking to come with spatial ideas, to come with development mechanism, and to deal with those stakeholders, including public, private sector, and so on. So that, but we don't design a city like an architect who used to design a building. When you have more control over a building design, for the city design or urban design, we deal with much wider, extensive spatial and temporal environment. So in which we don't have, we have very weak control sometimes to the final form of the city. So at the early stage of planning, we come with so-called framework, right? We are not a final architect, we are not a final developer, but we come with a kind of framework that is comprehensive. And that framework will accommodate different programs, different functions like office, housing, public space, even infrastructure system. And there's a time strategy. You cannot do it at one shot. You need to handle the process over a pretty extensive temporal dimension, like a few years. So you come with a framework, and to use that framework to communicate with stakeholders and to get consensus, and then we can move forward that agenda, the vision of the region. So that's a very typical example of urban design as a framework. So I like to talk about a lot of work from Kevin Lynch, who developed theories of urban design from 1950. Even today, we are greatly influenced by Lynch, like including the book like Image of the City, What Time Is This Place, Managing the Sense of Region, Site Planning. And the final book that he published before he passed away, Good City Form, is one of the most important publications in urban design. And Kevin Lynch, I think that's, you can go to his publication and writing. He was educated at Yale partially, and he studied with this man, Frank Lloyd Wright, a renowned American architect, before he went to MIT to get a degree. And he became a faculty member at MIT in 1950. So there was one important event. In 1958, Harvard organized the first conference on urban design. I think he was there. This is, you can see Kevin Lynch. This is Jane Jacob, who has a famous book, The Death and Life of Great American City. And there are some famous people. For example, this is Ian McCarr from UPenn, Louis Kahn, the architect, and this is the I.M. Pei, the architect who passed away not long ago. So you can see that in 1958 or 1960, there's an emerging discipline we call urban design. And Harvard built the first urban design program from 1960 or 1961. So there's a legacy about urban design that we can learn from. I think that body of knowledge from Harvard, MIT, like Kevin Lynch, is central in that kind of emerging discipline. So a lot of ideas that I'm going to introduce today come from Kevin Lynch publication. So he defined urban design as 4 different objectives, and he suggests 3 different modes of urban design and 6 possibilities. So I'm going to elaborate the 6 possibilities to connect to smart city. What would be the new possible approaches about smart city that we are doing today? And I would like to talk about theory from urban design, theory of Kevin Lynch. What is the form of the city and how is it made? And finally, we will conclude with our proposition. I think that proposition called urban system design is a collective effort between myself, Yamagata-san, and Murayama-san. I think we jointly have been moving that agenda, urban system design, for many years. I think 4 to 5 years. I think the studio that we are having today is part of that very exciting agenda we have on urban system design. So let's begin from 4 potential objectives in urban design that Kevin Lynch defined. So he talked about object design, project design, system design, and city and environmental design in the writing that he did. So object design, so we design a larger scale environment like an object, like when we design a piece of architecture. So this is one example of waterfront design that I did in the city of Guangzhou in 2008. So there was a kind of sculptural form of a public space, the center of the new town in Guangzhou, so which is part of the history. There's an opium war, 19th century, and the government wanted to revitalize the waterfront in that very significant historical area. It's called White Swan. So we used a kind of a sculptural form of landmark building, landscape building, a bit similar to White Swan, to represent the image of the place. So urban design could be more like a sculptural form, architecture expression in a very narrowly defined sense. And urban design is often defined as a project design, in which you have very clear boundary of your project, like say 100 hectares, right? And you have a client who pay for the project. It could be government, it could be developer. And you know there's a time process, there's a time schedule to get it done in a few years. And so the urban designer take the project, sign the contract with the client, and to prepare the master plan. So this is one of the earliest proposal. I was part of that, 1997, a long time ago. And to design a stadium park in the city called Tianjin. Tianjin is one of the biggest cities in China today. So there was an architecture from Kenzo Tengi office, and I was part of an MAA office in Taipei. And there was a developer from Taiwan and Philippines who suggests a new development in Tianjin. So the right-hand side, you can see the model master plan that we work together with Kenzo Tengi office. And we come with 2 different alternative proposals. So one of them is a mega shopping mall, right? I think there's a public-private partnership because the government would like to build a stadium, but they like the developer to pay for the stadium and give the developer the land for private housing development and commercial. So there's a kind of a contract between public-private sector to work together for this proposal. So we as urban design professional, we prepare master plan, a different option, like a big shopping mall. It's a developer like that. And we also propose the kind of street-like retail shopping street, but we are required to build a stadium and some housing for developer to benefit from the project. And they will give stadium back to the government for the public to use it. So there's a kind of very complicated communication process to determine which option would be. So when we presented this A and B proposal, the developer quickly picked the second one, the first one. They like Mall America, the big shopping mall. But we prefer the second option, the kind of a pedestrian-friendly commercial retail shopping. But the developer immediately like, okay, I like big shopping mall. It was unfortunate. So architect, urban designer, and planner always mediate between stakeholder, client. The client who pay, he has more power or she has more power to influence the final product. But we try to promote the idea in the process. So you can see the left-hand side, what is actually being built today is not exactly the same as the proposal, right? So over time, there are many other planners, urban designer, architect, developer, they came in and shaping the final product of the design. So urban design as a project design is a very typical practice of urban design. And the other example, we see urban design as a system design. For instance, I did this Taipei Botanic Garden in 2006, and you can see that Botanic Garden was redesigned, and there's some public spaces. And there was a concept called nature and city symbiosis, trying to bring nature into the city. And we designed the garden as an ecosystem with mountain, wetland, tropical, forest, different local ecosystem to be symbiotic by energy, material, water recycle flow. So there's a system design. Sometimes we apply to urban design. And finally, urban design can be very wide range, that you are helping a community, a district, to transform their community over time. So we propose a framework. We don't design specific object. So we propose a framework of infrastructure, land use, and phasing implementation strategy. And using that framework to communicate with government, community people, and stakeholders to get consensus about density, about urban growth pattern, and so on. So this is the very kind of more planning perspective of urban design. So the above four examples are the typical objective of urban design. Could be object, could be a project, it could be a system, it could be like a framework as a city design. So, and I would like to talk about, Kevin Lynch also introduced three different modes of urban design that he defined clearly as a traditional urban design practice, including larger scale design for strategic urban site, urban conservation, design guideline, or programming. I think these are three well-defined modes of urban design. And I'm going to elaborate 6 possibilities following that. So the first mode, urban design, is like larger scale design. And this is the city I'm now located, Atlanta. There's a Beltline project by repurpose the railway road to become greenway. So there are lots of strategic sites being redesigned. There's a market called Pound City Market being designed as a public space, as a shopping area. And you can see the boardwalk, kind of public spaces being proposed along the pretty wide, larger scale environment. So that's one example. And the other example is like in Shanghai, they have a lot of larger scale design. For example, 2010, Shanghai organized World Expo. So Tongji University and SOM, the firm from United States, they proposed a master plan for organizing the expo, World Expo 2010. You can see different pavilions of different countries are accommodated by this framework. They have this ellipse, but it wasn't realized fully. You can see only partially realized after it was built. So urban designers come with a physical framework and larger scale design strategy, including infrastructure, public space, and program. And there's a kind of some diagram showing the open space system for that World Expo 2010. And this is another larger scale design that I did based on ESD, the firm, the practice I had in Shanghai. So we proposed this 2022 Asian Game Village through an international competition. So it's very wide scale. I think that is the area with the high-speed rail system running through the site. It's a waterfront site, and the government would like to have low carbon urban design community. And there's a game, Asian Game, to happen 2022. So there's a Asian Game Village is going to be used during the game, and after the game, there's a post-game function that we are also proposing in this master plan. So because there's a skyline, public spaces, the kind of housing during the post-game, the public housing being proposed. So it is very typical example of larger scale urban design. And the second mode of urban design that Kevin Lynch defined is urban conservation. So you can see Bologna, Italy, this beautiful historical town. And so there's some quality of the city. They are simply not designable. And those quality will produce it over time in history. Right? So they are not designable. The designer cannot produce the same quality by the new material we have today. So you cannot, it's difficult to mimic that quality. So therefore, the only strategy of urban planning is to do conservation, is to preserve and protect what it is. So that's the very clearly defined mode of urban design called urban conservation. And the third type of urban design that Lynch defined is called design guideline. Since we are not a final architect, we are not a final developer, so urban planner and urban designer propose guideline. You have this, this is one example when I did studio in MIT, we prepared this framework, design guideline. You have access, you have a main commercial node, you have a waterfront, green space, you have access looking over to the water by repurposing the existing industrial area. So the government and developer are interested in transforming this area. It's pretty big. You don't have one singular architect, so you need to build a guideline for managing the future changes. And the guideline can be turned to the building code or a physical guideline, like New York City. They have a guideline called Zone Green System. And you can Google Zone Green, New York City. And to get this guideline, say solar photovoltaic on the rooftop, you have a setback control. Small wind turbine, I think that you can install small wind turbine on the rooftop. How many percentage of the rooftop will be allowed for installing PV system and wind energy? So there's a guideline being proposed in New York City. So these are the three modes of urban design, and that was proposed from 1960 to 1980. I think there's a kind of body of knowledge about urban design being organized, say, by the writing in Kevin Lynch's work. So from here, I'd like to elaborate further. There are some 6 possibilities that Kevin Lynch mentioned in his writing, and I kind of redefine that 6 possible approaches of urban design from here, but including perceptual environment, sequential narrative city, adaptive reuse, event design, system design, and typology. I think there's 6 possibilities. So Kevin Lynch talked about city as a perceived structure. So there's a mental and physical structure of the city. And city is, there's a human perception behind the city. And there's a sensuous quality that we need to understand further. So urban design is about how sensuous quality can be structured, organized, and experienced. So this is city of Boston. You can see the diagram that he drew, talk about waterfront and some of those important landmark district, urban node, and so on. He published this book, Image of the City, to talk about perceptual dimension of a city. So there's a mental cognition from residents living in the West, in the East, and North and South. So the people resident in different locations, they have different perception, different image of the city. So we are living in a very pluralistic, very diverse point of view about a city. So urban design has variety of view. How do we develop a public consensus about the image of a city is very critical for Kevin Lynch. And the second approach, possible approach, is called sequential experience. I think in his other writing, What Time Is This Place? So Lynch developed this diagram to represent how humans move from point A to point B. So you got a main street, walking along the street. You have a different sense of enclosure, sense of openness, and so on. So there's a sequential experience of the city we need to understand. And in that book, he described it urban spaces is like music, right? So city structure and music and all other form of art has some similarity. And so when you walk along the main street of the city, it's like listening to the piece of music. But unlike music, you are in the controlled environment. When you listen to 1 or 2 minutes, 10 minutes music. But when you walk in the city, you are in a very much more open environment. You have choices by determining your routes to determine the senses you can perceive when you are walking, biking in the city. So that is very inspiring about sequential experience design for the city. So one of Kevin Lynch's colleagues, Donald Appleyard, he went to UC Berkeley and built this urban simulation lab. And they used physical model to simulate how car is driving in the city, even pedestrian walking in the city. They used micro camera to simulate the kind of visual quality of the city in San Francisco. But today we don't need that kind of expensive physical model. We can use GIS to simulate, say, visibility to operate sightline from individual viewer. So Yoshida-san will maybe can give you some tutorial about how we run the view shade analysis. So basically, pedestrian walking in the city on the street, you can operate the line of sight to understand the visibility, the openness of the public space when you simulate a 3-dimensional environment like Kevin Lynch. They couldn't do it, but we have much powerful tool to do it easily today. And this is an example that I use view shade analysis to analyze Shanghai. They like to have a final countdown at the end of the year. So viewer from the one side of the street to walking toward the landmark, the TV tower. So how far we can see the signboard and how much space is enclosed in front of the viewer can be analyzed by the 3-dimensional GIS visual analysis. And you can build a virtual model and couple with physical model to build a digital twin system in the long term. The third possible approach to urban design is adaptive reuse. So urban design is a conscious art of renewal, treated as a refurbishment and redoing. By recovering the selected historical feature, we can achieve some richness of spatial quality, which is otherwise unobtainable through new design. So that is the example of the warehouse being redesigned. So the composition of new and old material that generate the kind of unique quality. So that's an approach often taken by urban designer for some historical district. And the adaptive reuse, a project I'm doing right now is to redesign a village by changing or renovating the village house to become greenhouse, for instance. Like so those greenhouse could produce some energy, food, water, and become the kind of eco-carbon village. And that is kind of the example that I learned from the case study in Elmeel, nearby Amsterdam. There's an eco-village project. So they developed different prototype of renovation for village building. And the fourth approach to urban design is event design. So urban form can be ephemeral because you are organizing the events and you organize the process and by engaging community people. So this is the project called Dream Hammer in Norway. I think you can Google that Dream Hammer Norway to find out the video. It's a very exciting, interesting way of designing the process for engaging community and stakeholder. And so that's another exciting area, which is the system design. And we talk about digital twin system in particular, a new approach to urban design. So this is one example of project that I'm working right now with Aerospace System Engineering Laboratory within Georgia Tech, and in collaboration with Airport of Atlanta and Aerotropolis. There's an organization called Aerotropolis, Atlanta. They are handling infrastructure system nearby the airport. So we basically look at issue of mobility, for instance, during the COVID-19, the airport of Atlanta, the largest airport in the United States, is kind of in the big problem. It's not functioning so well. And how do we look into the current infrastructure and understand the people flow? And to look at how we improve the quality of mobility, for instance, then we apply the future mobility mode expansion by projecting different scenarios. And so we need to look at the present, near future, midterm future, and long-term future through applying data analytics and simulation, modeling of several kinds, including building energy mobility, urban network analysis, and going into the kind of approach from data, benchmarking mobility, and using some traffic management, forecasting traffic, and to look at the midterm future by integrating technology and integrate it into the scenario, and to project the long-term future by strategic planning. So this is something we would like to apply in future. And one other example of the digital twin system is for the Watertown. So that's the kind of tool that we are using in Shinagawa as well. We apply energy modeling for the settlement form to understand the energy demand over time, and also human flow over the network system, and also the wetland system to look at the risk of flooding for that area. So this is the emerging, very exciting topic for urban designer to handle, how you understand the flows behind different urban form proposal. And then finally, there's a number 6 possible approach to urban design. It's called situational typology. When urban environment is becoming situational, that is changing over time. So the typology of places that we define is now situational. There's a time dimension. So we don't just define housing, residential, industrial, office, retail. That is 20th century land use typology. We look at new way of defining spatial typology with time dimension. We go deliberating, presenting, recharging, sporting, touring, hoteling, walking, and so on. So this is a very inspiring idea. How do we redefine typology with space and time, right? So this, so with IoT infrastructure that is pervasive over the city, and that will be the new approach we like to use. So I think one project done by Yamagata-san and Yoshida-san by mapping Google popular time will be a good foundation for understanding activity pattern. And that is the kind of a data set we would like to learn how to capture them and how to classify them, and to understand the spatial and temporal mode of urban activity. And there will be foundation for understanding the situational typology that I described. So finally, we'd like to briefly talk about theories of urban design. So Kevin Lynch talked about 3 theories in his book, Good City Form, including normative theory, planning theory, and functional theory. So at normative theory, we ask question what it should be, instead of asking question of what it is, right? Many planners now keep analyzing data, only addressing the current situation by analyzing the data today. So that doesn't give us the answer about what it should be. So urban designer is interested in how city could be transformed to be better. And we need a procedure, a process to handle, to manage the decision making. So there are 3 kind of theory behind how we develop good city form in Kevin Lynch urban design theory. And I'd like to use one example quickly to describe that 3 dimension. That is a campus planning that I'm doing for my university. It's going to build a new campus in the city of Shenzhen, one of the emerging technology-driven city in China. So Georgia Tech is going to have a site nearby the high-speed rail terminal to build a new campus. So we like to bring in the new green campus design principle from the US to China to demonstrate how do we build a smart and ecological campus. So for that purpose, we organize the process to understand how it works. And there are different models behind. For example, we talk about urban design as a normative model. We need to understand how Shenzhen campus ought to be made, what generate campus design, how does urban design as a technique to synthesize so many different factors, right? Transportation, building, topography, and so on, and derive some principle for making quality campus. That's one approach. We call it normative model. And we also like to understand function, how the campus function is a complex system, and how do we derive properties of campus as complex system as a prescription to inform design. So you need to understand that complex system property in the process. And finally, we like to look at the procedure. How do we handle, manage process of decision-making that engage community and stakeholder? So the first approach is quite straightforward. These urban designers normally come with scenario, right? Come with the different urban design proposal, like concentration scenario, decentralization scenario, or clustering. So based on the same quantity, FAR, the same floor area of the campus, and what will be the alternative urban form or campus layout. So that's a typical approach that urban designer would look for. We look at context, right? The site context of transportation, climate, topography, and we look at content. Say the program of the campus. You have classroom, library, you have a student apartment, and so on. And you have how many square meters for different program, different land uses. Then you come with concept, different concept to produce different urban form campus layout. In this case, we have different concept of concentration, clustering, decentralization. Then you go to implementation. So that's a typical approach for urban design filmmaking by synthesizing different factors. And we like to use complex system theory, for instance, and to understand smart campus as a metabolism. Like this, in this case, you see solar energy, hydrology, mobility. They're all kind of a component, different subsystem of the system. So campus is so complicated, as you can see. Energy, connectivity, and learning environment, how to deal with innovation issue. Then we articulate them to understand their property and form different design proposal. But traditional urban designer form very limited proposal. Like we just draw scenario 1, 2, 3, right? So there are far more possibility than that when you understand those complex property. So we need to also look into the procedure. For example, we learn from geodesign. How do we describe the site, the environment as a representation model? And how do we look into the process model to understand how the environment function and how to evaluate the performance of that environment and how do we change it, how do we design for that by transforming the site and the environment to be better, and to understand the impact of your design, your alternative proposal for making decision. So that is the model proposed by Carl Steinitz to look at how we form a project. So with that 3 approaches in mind, campus design or urban design can be a data-driven, and we need a decision platform. And first of all, we use participation, right? We engage stakeholder and user to understand their user need and demand. And we also use modeling, for example, energy modeling, mobility modeling, and to understand different performance of scenario, different alternative. In this case, we like to build a near zero energy campus. How much energy will be produced, how much renewable energy can be developed in the campus. Then we can also go further using optimization approach, using parametric design. For instance, the topography would have different parameter property you can derive. That you don't build high density building on a steep slope, and you can build more at a flat ground. So you set the rule and parameter to generate different alternative layout. Then you run performance modeling to understand what is the optimal campus design layout. So we need those three approaches, all of the three, in order to develop a data-driven decision-making platform. So this is the final slide, almost. We need to move from traditional urban design as a form-making business to the new approach we call urban system design. So you can go to the book and book chapter to understand what we meant. I think we include Kevin Lynch's three theory, but we add one more, which is urban sensing system. There's a human interactive dimension, combining with normative model, right? Urban design, but that has to be data-driven with functional model, treated like a complex system as a metabolism, or as a procedural model like geodesign. So this four model would define what urban system design would mean. All right, so that's the final slide. So I would be happy to answer question. And this is the new degree program in Georgia Tech on urban data analytics. Thank you.